Hi, good afternoon. Valerie Milano here from the Hollywood Times and Aspiring Magazine. I'm in Palm Springs right now, and I want to welcome our guest today, and I'm going to have him introduce himself. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Zach Baliva, and I'm here today to talk about a documentary that I produced and directed called Potentially Dangerous. And, as you know, October is Italian American Heritage Month, and this film tells an important story about the Italian experience in the U.S. during World War II, and just really happy to be here. Thank you for the time.
Yes, I am so glad that I was able to see the film, and I encourage all those to do the same. Any idea why it hasn't been told before, or has it? And I just missed it.
This is a story that hasn't been told very often, and that's one of the things that really drew me to it as a journalist, as a filmmaker. When I found out about this untold Italian story, there's a book written on the topic by historian Larry DiStassi called Una Storia Segreta, a secret story, a secret history. And when I was looking for a story to tell and I found the work of Larry, I was so surprised that these topics that he's written about haven't gotten wider attention. So I hooked up with Larry and asked him why there hasn't been a documentary, and he shared with me that a lot of the Italians who experienced this uh, wartime persecution based on hysteria 80 years ago had been very reluctant to tell their stories because there was this concept of shame, which is so big in Italian culture. They call it vergogna, and this concept of we don't want anybody to know that this happened to us and how it affected us, so we'd rather stay quiet. And thanks to the work that Larry did, he kind of primed the pump and got these people more willing to tell their stories. And I think if he had not done this work with them that he started in the 90s, they wouldn't have been willing to participate in the documentary. And I'm so grateful that we got to tell their stories.
Yes, and I am as well. So, do you or John Turturro have any direct family members associated?
Well, it's such an interesting thing that this story has been so forgotten because Larry, the historian I mentioned, actually found out that he had family members who were involved as he was doing his own research. A lot of the most harsh restrictions happened on the coast, especially on the West Coast, because that's where we had most of our naval and military installations. There were also some severe restrictions on the East Coast, and then that flyover zone, sort of in the middle of the country, those people were part of the 600,000 Italians and Italian Americans who had these wartime restrictions placed upon them, surveillance. They had to register and carry ID cards. They had to forfeit personal property. They were under curfew. But in the Midwest, where my family's from, even my parents hadn't heard of these things because those were where the restrictions were a little bit not as harsh. There wasn't as much sort of detainment and internment there. And then again, coupled with that idea of not wanting to share these experiences, my own parents didn't know that this had happened. I didn't know that this had happened. And then, of course, we don't discuss the impact to the culture and the ongoing effects of these events. I'm going to repeat the question just so I make sure I heard you. I think you said, in your opinion, what is the solution to some of the fear-based politics that this film raises? Well, in making the documentary, what I really realized was, when you consider the personal stories of people who are willing to share their experience with you, it's much harder to look at everything as us versus them or black and white. There's a lot of nuance involved. And so you can think about how complicated it is to have these policies, especially during wartime, right? But aspirationally, what kind of country do we want to be? How do we want to treat each other and the people living within our borders? And I think that's such a powerful thing about documentary films in general. I hope that Potentially Dangerous and other films and works of art can be tools for educational and social change and things that we can use to sort of challenge the established narratives and also sort of make sense about what's happening in the current world that we live in.
Yes.
So, when people watch Potentially Dangerous, what I want them to do is hear these people tell their own stories in their own words. And when you hear the experience of these people who saw, FBI agents come into their homes and take their parents away, when you learn that 70, 80 years later, they still don't know why. They were never given a reason for why their father was out of their home for a year or 18 months or even more. And these events have long-term traumatic effects on individuals, on families, on the culture, on society, on politics, on policy. And it's really important to understand the experience of these people who live through these things. And that's, such a valuable thing about documentary films and other sort of, works of art in our culture.
And how long was the interview process with the interviewees for the documentary?
Well, the production process for Potentially Dangerous was a little bit unusual and consolidated. We were actually funded through a grant program from the Russo brothers, who are two of the biggest and most exciting directors working in Hollywood today, Italian Americans themselves, of course. And they're just so wonderfully supportive of films and projects that highlight something of the Italian experience, the Italian American experience. And so just so grateful for their support. And the way that their program worked then, it's changed a little bit since, was, you received an award of the grant, and then we had 5 months to tell the story. And we hadn't really started doing research or interviews before then. And I should also point out that this was the year of the COVID shutdowns. So, we had a budget, a very small budget. We did a little Kickstarter to raise that up. And then we had 5 months to do everything from, research, pre-production, production, post, and deliver the finished project by the time the grant deadline hit, or else we would be disqualified from the program and have no film. So thankfully, as I mentioned, Larry DeSassi and others have done some of the groundwork that served as the framework for the film. They kind of pointed us in the right direction for a lot of these interviews to happen. But then everything was super consolidated. We filmed some in Washington, D.C. and other cities on the East Coast. Then we immediately traveled to the West Coast. A lot of the story takes place mostly around San Francisco and Oakland, other parts sort of around the Bay Area. And we did, gosh, 20 interviews in 13 days or something like that. And really just tried to make sense of a lot of these sort of overlapping, complex, complicated, nuanced stories that people were telling us, trying to put it in that historical context. And what we really wanted to do, at least for me as a filmmaker, was I was less interested in the facts and the figures and the dates. And of course, those are important, right? As a filmmaker and a journalist, I'm not saying that the facts aren't important, but I didn't necessarily want students and audience members to walk away thinking it was important to memorize what date the internment ended or how many people were involved. Of course, generally it's important to know those things. But in this film, as we had a consolidated production schedule, I wanted to hear the testimonies. I wanted to hear the stories and have people walk away with that as their takeaway of, okay, this happened to these people. This could happen again. And what do I have to grapple with, whether I'm Republican or Democrat, whether I believe in open borders or closed borders or restricted immigration or not? When I hear these stories, what am I confronted with? And how does that change me? And what do I walk away thinking about? And those were the things I was more interested in rather than memorizing who the attorney general was or what date something happened. I really wanted to hear and let those personal stories be heard, because frankly, these people aren't going to be with us much longer. I mean, these events happened 80 years ago. Most of the people we were interviewing were at least in their 80s. Some of them are in their 90s. And this is the first opportunity they've had to tell their stories to a wide mainstream audience. And I should also mention that's why we're so grateful to have the support of the Russo brothers, the support of a lot of different Italian American organizations like ISDA, and of John Turturro, our executive producer, who helped us get the film to PBS member stations, which we're so excited about. So lots of people can hear what has been a forgotten story. And I should mention too that if your viewers go to potentiallydangerousfilm.com, we also just released the film on DVD and streaming on October 14th to coincide with Italian American Heritage Month. So perfect time to go online, to go on PBS member stations and find this story that you probably don't know.
Wonderful. Thank you for saying that, because that was going to be one of my questions, is how can our viewers and readers check out more? Um, has there been any initiatives for justice for the Italian communities to date?
Yeah, that's
What-
something that we cover a little bit in the film. And even as I've interviewed these people, I'm starting to hear a little bit more about what they would want and expect. There hasn't really been much of a conversation of reparations or anything like that. Really, what they want is for people just to know what happened to their community. And as is covered in the documentary, there has been a push for an official apology from the U.S. government. There was a very instrumental uh, researched report that was issued in 2001. And that was really the first step that the government took to understand what happened, who was affected, how many people, and they took great testimony and developed a public document that others can find if they Google sort of the Department of Justice 2001 report on the experience of Italian Americans during World War II. And people that have Italian heritage can look in the indexes and see if their family members, if their last names are in there and everything. And so that was a little bit of an official recognition, but some people in the Italian community say in the Italian American community that they would have liked to see it go a step farther. They would have liked to see an American president do what a Canadian prime minister has done and come out and issue a public apology for the internment of Italians and Canadian Italians. That hasn't happened to date in an official capacity from a U.S. president. Some Italians say that they would find that very, I don't know, satisfactory and fulfilling. Others say that it's not that important. But then again, there are other places like in Sharp Park in California where there are being monuments that are built to recognize that these things have happened. And right now, the Italian community is being left out of some of those sort of monuments and official recognitions. And so there is some advocacy to say, hey, when we're talking about what happened to different communities during World War II, let's make sure that we include everybody that was affected by this wartime hysteria, by this persecution, by these internments that affected so many people. There were 600,000 people that were subject to these measures, and hundreds and over 1,000 that were interned and detained, and it made a significant impact that I think we should recognize as we discuss this important era in our history.
Thank you for that, Zach. Because, I don't even know if you can answer this, but is there anything, what can society do to help right this wrong?
I think it's just really an awareness. I mean, we think about even what's happening now, right? We're in this time of exceptional political unrest and sort of seeing history repeat itself in the sense of demonizing the immigrant community, talking about the enemy within. We're hearing a candidate for president of the United States invoke the Alien Enemy Act. And the last time that act was used in our country by our government is depicted in this film. So if you watch Potentially Dangerous, you can see what happened the last time a US president invoked this act. And 80 years later, how there are still effects on the individuals and on the community as a whole. I mean, we interviewed one person in the documentary, Tony Rosati, who talks about what happened to his father, Domenico. Domenico was licensed to practice medicine in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was arrested, interned, released, arrested again, and his family still doesn't know the exact reasons why. I mean, they can sort of think about some of the public comments he made and sort of put two and two together, but they've never been given an official reason. And Tony shared with us that until his mother's death, she was scared to answer the telephone decades later because she thought the US government was surveilling her. And if she had certain conversations, they might come into her house and take her or her son away. And she actually forbade her son from doing interviews like he did with me while she was alive. So he waited to tell his father's story to respect the wishes of his mother until she died because these events so traumatized and impacted her for her entire life. And that's just one of many stories that we cover in the film, and we're so thankful for these people who sat with us and shared their experience so we could put it on film and get these stories out to the mainstream.
Well, we're the Hollywood Times official is our YouTube channel, the Hollywood Times today, aspiringmagazine.com. And is there anything more you'd like to add? Please repeat how our viewers and readers can find more about the film, more about you and your works, please.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for the opportunity. People can go to the website potentiallydangerousfilm.com and they can access the film there on DVD or streaming. They can also see some behind the scenes footage. I actually got to go to Italy to see my own great grandfather's land and discover a little bit about my own origins. I had the opportunity to have my dual citizenship recognized, and that was actually part of the impetus for this film, was going through that process and realizing that I wasn't closely connected to my culture and I didn't really know much more about my own family's story. So going over there and being able to see his land and ask some of these questions. And one of the beautiful things that happened there was I was able to interview the mayor of my ancestral hometown called Pinay, this very small town sort of near Pescara and Abruzzo of 14,000 people. And that interview is on the website. And what's so beautiful about it is he sort of gives the opposite perspective, right, of what it was like for people in those generations to watch their fellow Italians leave their country for something better in the United States, only to find out that they went through this persecution only because of their identity, only because of the fact that they were Italian. And these Italians in Pinay were watching sort of their best and their brightest leave for a better life, only to discover this was happening to them during a time of war. And his interview on the website is just so profound and thoughtful that I would really encourage people, but not just to watch the film. I also want members of the audience and people who discover this story to engage in conversations and realize the importance of remembering these parts of stories, these parts of history, of our shared history, right? They can engage with us on Instagram and Facebook and other social channels and share their own stories, connect with others who have had similar experiences, and develop empathy for others who are going through eras in which they're experiencing similar topics, similar persecution now. I think again, another thing that I hope this project can do is open those conversations a little bit more.
Very, very important. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Pleasure to meet you. Maybe we'll get to meet in person at a film festival.
I hope so. Thank you for your time and great
Thank
to be
you.
with you today. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. Have a good rest of your day. All right.